Kathleen Dorsett and her parents were about as respectable as a middle-class family could get.
Kathleen was an elementary school teacher.
Kathleen's mother had been a member of the Board of Education.
Tom Dorsett was the guy you would want to be your neighbor next door.
And the family was especially close, too.
They had this interesting bond.
They did lots of things together.
But then a sudden disappearance.
This is not like him.
And a mysterious fire.
Or maybe a car.
Would lead to a gruesome discovery.
There was a body in the trunk.
And leave the authorities wondering just how far would one family go to protect their own.
She and her father had hatched this idea.
The hairs on the back of my neck just went up.
That was the furthest thing that I would ever expect.
Long Branch, New Jersey, August 18, 2010. It was a little before dawn in this fading beach town an hour south of Newark.
Long Branch is blue-collar, middle-class workers with their modest homes. Nice homes, but not affluent.
Although that Wednesday morning at around 4:15, a local resident dialed 911 and reported something burning 4 blocks off the beach.
Or maybe a car.
Moments later, another nearby resident also called in the fire, confirming that it was a car.
Is anybody in the car, can you tell? No, I don't think so. You don't think so? The car looks empty.
Police and firefighters were on the scene within minutes.
The initial incident was a fully involved car fire.
And when the firefighters extinguished the flames that gutted the car, what they found was startling.
There was a body in the trunk of the car.
It was very badly burned.
So badly burned, in fact, that any further identification would require either dental records or DNA analysis.
We weren't sure if it was a male, female, or who it was.
A mystery victim, a burned-out car, and a lonely beach road. Considering this was New Jersey, the cops at the scene couldn't help but wonder, were they dealing with a mob hit?
It looked like the fire had been lit on top of the body.
But who was the mysterious victim whose identity the killer had taken such pains to conceal? And why had they done? As it turned out, the answers would involve a crime family of sorts. But the key to unraveling the mystery wasn't a mafia kingpin. It was a 36-year-old elementary school teacher named Kathleen Dorsett. Born in 1974, Kathleen had a comfortable childhood growing up in Ocean Township, New Jersey.
It's in a pretty suburban area. Ocean Township is really a kind of a nice place to live. It's close to the shore.
Kathleen's father, Thomas Dorsett, was a modestly successful local businessman.
Tom Dorsett started a refrigeration business in the mid-'80s, was involved in community affairs, involved with church. Everybody's, best friend, the guy you would want to be your neighbor next door.
The model for the American middle-class man.
And if anything, Kathleen's mother, Leslie, was even more of a role model than her father.
Kathleen's mother had been a member of the Board of Education. She also had been a teacher.
Leslie also took a very active role in raising Kathleen and her brother.
Leslie was very involved in her kids' lives, and the same thing with Thomas. It was a close-knit family, her brother, and her parents.
Kathleen did eventually move out on her own, but she didn't go far. After college, she followed her mother's career path and took a job with the Ocean Township school system.
Kathleen was an elementary school teacher.
And by her early 30s, she had settled into a middle-class life that appeared to be as successful as her parents. But there was still something missing.
She wanted to be married. She looked forward to being married and having a family.
It was just that she hadn't found what she felt was the right person. That is, until she met Stephen Moore. 6 years older than Kathleen, Stephen wasn't a New Jersey native.
Stephen's family lived in California.
And growing up just south of LA in Huntington Beach, Stephen had a typical Southern California childhood.
He liked to ride bike, skateboard, listen to music.
But his real passion was inline skating.
He did competitive skating and he won a bronze medal in the national championships.
Although when he wasn't competing, the skater took a very laid-back approach to life.
Stephen was pretty easygoing.
He never had a set job. He always found work. He did construction. He worked at a sound studio. He did whatever he could to make money.
Stephen took an equally laid-back approach to relationships, too.
We tease him a lot about, hey, when are you going to get married? And, hey, when are you going to find somebody?
But his friend's good-natured teasing stopped once he met Kathleen.
When he met Kathleen, he called me up, and I was very happy for him. He finally met somebody.
In fact, the 39-year-old hadn't just met someone. He was engaged.
I was very, very happy that, wow, he's going to get married.
Kathleen and Stephen married in 2007, and naturally, they settled close to her mom and dad.
When she and Stephen married, they moved into a house across the street from her parents.
Their parents, they own that house.
Not only did that mean a great deal on the rent, it was also quite convenient for Kathleen, who remained as close to her parents as ever.
Kathleen was always around her family. Her family was always there. She was always at their house, and they did lots of things together.
Even if there were times when Stephen wished for a little more privacy.
They would just stop by. They would just come in unannounced and would walk in the house. And that felt really odd to him. He felt really uncomfortable with them just coming over unannounced.
Still, despite Stephen's occasional annoyance with his in-laws, the marriage appeared to be a success.
They're very happy, very touchy-feely, kissing, they're in love. And it was great to see.
And in the spring of 2008, Stephen suddenly had reason to appreciate having Kathleen's parents so close.
She was pregnant.
For Kathleen, it was the fulfillment of all her dreams.
She wanted to have a baby.
And Stephen couldn't have been happier.
He seemed so excited that he was going to have a baby and get that all going in his life.
But then, once their little girl was born in December of 2008, things changed.
About a month or 2, 3 months into it, we'd talk on the phone, and he kind of would say that, things were just a little different.
For one thing, the baby had produced a profound shift in Kathleen's relationship with Stephen.
She didn't want anything really to do with him. The intimacy, the hanging out, the stuff I saw, them kissing and holding hands and all that, that was all gone.
At first, his friends advised Stephen to be patient.
I thought, okay, a new mom, done.
But by the fall of 2009, almost a year after the birth of their baby girl, Stephen decided he'd been patient enough.
He could not live in this environment anymore.
That October, he moved out of the home he'd shared with Kathleen and in with his mother, who lived nearby.
He was saying they were having problems and that they were probably going to get a divorce. And I go, well, if you're not happy, you're not happy. Why be married if you're not happy anymore?
Their 2-year marriage was over, but Stephen did want to be a part of his daughter's life.
Stephen wanted to be a father, and he didn't want to be just a 2-day or weekend dad. He wanted to be a part of his child's life.
And it appeared that everyone was amenable to that. In fact, the terms of the divorce were extremely generous to Stephen. The impetus behind the divorce settlement appeared to be Kathleen's parents' retirement plans.
They were building a house in Florida.
They wanted Kathleen and the baby to come with them.
And since Stephen wanted to remain a part of his daughter's life, Kathleen's parents had promised to help him move to Florida, too.
The Dorsetts agreed to pay him for his room and board for a period of time until he got himself on the ground and got settled.
As long as he kept it civil and kept the peace as much as he could on his side, that he'd still be able to see his child.
Stephen agreed to the terms. The divorce was finalized in June, and Kathleen's parents put their house up for sale, while the contractors put the finishing touches on their new home in Florida.
In September, they were supposed to move there.
But their plans would be delayed because on August 16th, shortly after he kissed his little girl goodbye and placed her in Kathleen's arms, Stephen Moore would vanish. When 42-year-old Stephen Moore was late for work at the Honda dealership in Eatontown, New Jersey on the morning of August 16, 2010, it didn't take long for his coworkers to notice.
He always showed up.
Hadn't been updated since his divorce from Kathleen Dorsett 2 months earlier.
Kathleen told him that the last time she had seen Stephen was approximately 7:30 a.m. when he was dropping off their daughter.
Which meant he should have been at work by then. So after waiting a little while longer with still no sign of Stephen, his coworkers decided to call the police.
They were the ones who reported him missing.
Stephen Moore, reliable guy that always shows up to work every day. This is not like him. There's something wrong.
It was a fairly routine report, but the missing persons investigators did follow up with a phone call to Kathleen.
Kathleen confirmed the fact that he had dropped off their child.
Kathleen explained that he had left for work right after the dropping off their child.
The investigators also did a quick search of Stephen's financial and phone records. Not that they revealed much.
The last outgoing call that he had made was at 6:54 a.m. that morning, August 16th, to a cell phone number that came back to Kathleen Dorsett.
But did that simply confirm what Kathleen told the investigators, that Stephen had dropped off their daughter before he disappeared? Or did the timing suggest that she had something to do with his disappearance? Hoping for a little insight, the investigators contacted several of Stephen's family and friends, asking for details about the couple's recent divorce. And what they heard was disturbing. According to Stephen's friends and family, the marriage had started out fine.
He was very, very happy that he had met somebody, and that was it. You know, he found somebody, the love of his life.
But once the baby was born, it had become clear that the little girl was the love of Kathleen's life, not Stephen.
She was just more focused on the baby, and that was it.
That much was normal for a new mother, but Stephen's friends and family claimed that Kathleen had taken it to the extreme.
She didn't trust him by himself with the babe. You know, she took control of the whole thing.
Literally.
He wasn't allowed to hold his daughter after her birth for the first 6 months.
And according to his friends, the couple's marriage fell apart because Stephen refused to be shut out of his daughter's life.
Stephen decided that if he was going to have a relationship with his daughter, he was going to have to leave Kathleen.
Although when he filed for divorce, Stephen's friends said the initial result was a bitter struggle for custody.
She wanted that baby to herself.
However, the courts had temporarily awarded Stephen partial custody and visitation rights pending final resolution of the divorce.
Stephen was not willing to give up the visitation or the custody of his daughter.
Faced with the court's decision, Kathleen had little choice but to allow Stephen to spend time with his daughter. But according to friends, that didn't mean she was willing to relinquish control.
She was always making phone calls to him when he had custody of her. What are you doing? What are you feeding her? Wanted that control and would never leave him alone about that.
Kathleen would write out a list of, you have to do X, Y, and Z, and at different times.
But then, in the spring of 2010, friends said that Kathleen's attitude had appeared to soften. In fact, planning to move to Florida with her parents, they'd made Stephen a generous offer so that he could remain close to his daughter.
Part of the agreement was that the Dorsetts would help him find a place to live and would help him financially for 6 months.
Friends told the investigators that they had warned Stephen not to agree.
My fear of them going down there would be that they wouldn't live up to their promises.
But while Stephen's friends worried that Kathleen and her parents might back out on their promises, they never considered the other possibility, that he might not live to collect on them. It was early on the morning of August 18th less than 48 hours after Stephen disappeared, when the Long Branch, New Jersey police received a 911 call about a car on fire.
Is anybody in the car, can you tell? No, I don't think so.
But when firefighters extinguished the flames,
Human remains were located in the trunk of a vehicle.
but while the body was too badly burned to allow easy identification, the car wasn't.
The front of the vehicle, as far as fire damage, was pretty much untouched, so that the front license plate was visible.
And when the police ran the plates,
The hit that returned on it, indicating that that vehicle was involved in a missing person investigation.
specifically, the car was registered to Stephen Moore's mother.
He was reported to be operating that vehicle at the time that he went missing.
The investigators immediately contacted Kathleen.
We notified her that we found her ex-mother-in-law's car and that there was the remains of a body in the back of it.
And how did Kathleen take the news?
It didn't seem to faze her.
Kathleen's nonchalant response immediately made the investigators suspicious.
A rational person who would probably start putting two and two together, this is going to be my ex-husband in the trunk. But there was no reaction to that. Just she answered our questions pretty matter-of-factly.
And she more or less repeated what she'd already told the missing persons investigators, that she'd last seen Stephen when he dropped off their daughter 2 days earlier.
She pretty much said that it was the normal drop-off.
She wasn't the only one who said so either. While the investigators were questioning Kathleen, her father walked over from his house across the street and told the investigators that he'd witnessed the drop-off too.
He told us that he was in the kitchen of his residence and he observed Stephen Moore operating his mother, Evelyn Moore's vehicle.
Where Stephen went and how his mother's car had ended up on fire in Long Branch, neither Kathleen nor her father could say. But Kathleen did have one helpful piece of information for the investigators.
I did ask her about dental records, knowing that we needed to identify the human remains, and she identified Stephen's dentist.
The investigators obtained Stephen's records from his dentist. And the next day, August 19th, the medical examiner's office confirmed what they had already suspected.
The body in the back of the car that was burned was the remains of Stephen Moore.
The other thing the autopsy revealed wasn't entirely a surprise either.
There was trauma to his head, and there was some damage to his throat area. He was killed previous to the fire.
And the investigators figured they had a pretty good idea just who had bludgeoned and strangled Stephen before setting his body on fire. On Friday, August 20th, when the investigators spoke to Kathleen at her parents' Ocean Township home and told her that it was definitely Stephen's charred corpse that had been pulled from his mother's car 4 days earlier, the news didn't seem to faze her.
It was like I just had placed a lunch order.
Even if you have a relationship and that marriage goes south and you guys end up in a divorce, you'd still think you have some sort of care, concern for that other person, and you'd have some reaction emotionally. And she didn't.
However, Kathleen was just as willing to cooperate as ever. When the investigators asked permission to search the house and property she and Stephen rented from her parents, she not only agreed, she accompanied them across the street and played the perfect hostess.
She offered us a drink, she offered us food, said that we could use her restroom. She was accommodating.
Meanwhile, in the backyard, the investigators noticed something that aroused their curiosity: a freshly mulched flower bed near Kathleen's driveway.
Typically, if you were going to mulch, you would remove the weeds. But this flower bedded area just had the mulch thrown on top, and you can see weeds just popped out here and there.
That caused some great concern for the detectives because they thought that maybe there was something there.
And when one of the investigators slipped on gloves and began rooting around under the mulch, his hands came out red.
There was enough blood in there to leave blood on the glove.
And the investigators were pretty sure it was Stephen's, especially after they tested the area with luminol and cadaver dogs.
Once the cadaver dog came on scene, there was a positive indication for human blood.
Once the cadaver dog confirmed that it was human blood in the flower bed, the investigators brought Kathleen in for a formal interview.
We do attempt to speak to her in regard to the scene that we find, but she was not willing to. This is when she begins to not cooperate with us. She decides that she's now going to have an attorney present.
The investigators stopped the interview and let Kathleen go home, but she would still need that attorney. Because on Monday afternoon, August 23rd, the detectives returned to Kathleen's house with an arrest warrant.
When we went to arrest her, both Thomas Dorsett and Leslie Dorsett were at the residence along with Kathleen's child.
Once again, Kathleen had little reaction to the news. But as the investigators placed his daughter in handcuffs, Thomas Dorsett did do something.
He removed his wallet from the rear of his pants pocket and he handed him over to his wife.
From a police standpoint, people do that when they're about to be placed under arrest.
Thomas's reaction puzzled the investigators.
We were not there for Thomas Dorsett. We were only there for Kathleen.
But even as they placed Kathleen in the back of the patrol car, the investigators couldn't help but wonder, why would Kathleen's father expect to be arrested? On Monday, August 23rd, 2010, it had been 5 days since Kathleen Dorsett's ex-husband, Stephen Moore, had been found dead in the back of a burned-out car in Long Branch, New Jersey.
The last time he was seen was by Kathleen Dorsett.
And the authorities were convinced that Kathleen really was the last person who'd seen Stephen alive. They had just arrested her for his murder.
Stephen was battling child custody issues with Kathleen.
The custody fight wasn't the only reason Kathleen was under arrest either. A search of Kathleen's backyard had revealed a possible crime scene.
Human blood was located in this mulched area towards the back of the house.
And when the investigators questioned Kathleen's next-door neighbor, they uncovered further evidence suggesting Stephen had been killed in Kathleen's backyard. According to the neighbor, she'd just gotten up on Monday morning, August 16th, when she was startled by a strange noise from next door.
She described as an animal-like screaming.
The neighbor told the investigators that she'd run to the window to see what was wrong and called Kathleen, who was standing in the driveway.
She'd asked her if she was okay.
And Kathleen's response.
Kathleen Dorsett screams at her, telling her to shut her window and to mind her own business.
What was going on in Kathleen's backyard? Between the screaming and the blood in the flower bed, the investigators figured they had a pretty good idea. And the neighbor's story put Kathleen at the scene of the crime, too. But had she been alone? Earlier, when they slipped the handcuffs on his daughter, the authorities couldn't help but notice that her father, Thomas Dorsett, had a curious reaction to Kathleen's arrest.
Thomas begins to empty out his pockets, his wallet, his phone, and is handing them to his wife, Leslie.
Assuming that he was going to be arrested next.
At the time, the investigators didn't have probable cause to arrest Thomas Dorsett. But they did start looking more closely at the 64-year-old refrigeration technician as a possible suspect.
To see what his movements were and who he was communicating with and things of that nature.
Naturally, considering the fact that his daughter had just been arrested, one of the first people Thomas Dorsett contacted was an attorney.
Tom called me late that evening, told me that Kathleen had been arrested, so I made arrangements to meet with him the following morning at my office at 8 o'clock to discuss Kathleen's situation.
And when the attorney drove to his office on Tuesday morning, it appeared that Kathleen's father was already waiting for him.
I could see a truck parked in my lot. I figured that was his.
In fact, it looked as if Kathleen's father had been waiting a while.
He appeared to be sleeping because his head was leaning, his body was leaning against the window.
Only when he got closer, the attorney realized that Kathleen's father wasn't exactly asleep.
Thomas Dorsett had attempted to commit suicide.
He was unconscious with a white tube coming out of his mouth.
The other end of the hose was attached to a canister of refrigerant gas.
He was trying to commit suicide through the use of like a Freon inhalant.
I started knocking on the window, tried to awaken him. He was unresponsive.
And when that failed, the attorney dialed 911.
A marked police unit from Neptune Township arrived, and he broke the window. They called the EMTs, and they took him away.
He was in very serious condition.
In fact, Kathleen's father was still unconscious when he arrived at the emergency room.
And at that point, it was uncertain whether or not he was going to survive.
But why would he try and commit suicide? For the investigators, it was all too clear.
My assumption of it is that he was trying to take the blame of the death of Stephen Moore and exonerate the rest of his family.
However, did that mean he was actually involved? Or was he merely trying to sacrifice himself for his daughter's sake? The answer would hinge on a phone call the investigators received later that same day. The caller owned a popular seafood restaurant in Long Branch, not far from where Stephen's body had been found.
He was also friends with Thomas Dorsett.
The restaurant owner told the investigators he had become concerned after seeing news reports about Kathleen's arrest.
The local news media, radio, print media, had released information about Kathleen's arrest the night before.
However, the restaurant owner wasn't just concerned because Thomas Dorsett was a friend. He told the investigators that he had been prompted to contact them because Kathleen's father had called him a few days earlier with an odd request concerning the security cameras outside his restaurant.
He and Thomas had a conversation about Thomas buying some of his video surveillance equipment to get rid of it or destroy it to replace it with new equipment.
Specifically, according to the restaurant owner, Kathleen's dad wanted to get his hands on the camera that covered the dumpster behind the restaurant.
Why would he do this? Unless there was something on there that he didn't want authorities to see.
According to the restaurant owner, Thomas Dorsett had admitted as much, although he claimed it had to do with his business servicing refrigeration systems.
He said he was illegally dumping something, and he didn't want to get caught.
Or had he really been dumping evidence connected to Stephen's murder? Either way, the investigators would get a chance to find out, because the restaurant owner told them he'd turned down Thomas's strange request.
He was able to provide us with the actual video surveillance.
And when the investigators reviewed the surveillance footage, they could hardly believe their luck, because the tape from August 16th showed that just a few hours after Stephen Moore had been reported missing, Kathleen's father had driven up to the dumpster behind his friend's restaurant. And guess whose car he was driving?
The surveillance video depicts Thomas Dorsett driving Evelyn Moore's car, which was the car that Stephen Moore was in possession of that day to drop his daughter off.
And he wasn't alone either.
Directly behind him, following him, is Kathleen Dorsett.
Maybe not even a minute. And then they leave. I don't know whether they thought it was too busy over there or whatever the reason was.
That wasn't the end of the video, though, because less than an hour later, Thomas Dorsett was back, this time in his work van.
He's throwing stuff into the dumpster.
And contrary to what he had told his friend, the restaurant owner, there was nothing specifically illegal about them.
He's taking items out of that van that appeared to be cleanup supplies.
So there's Rubbermaid containers, there's garbage cans, a rope, looks like a 4x4, there's a bottle of bleach.
Stuff that certainly could have been used cleaning up the scene.
Along with the fact that he'd been captured on tape driving Stephen's car, the same car his badly burned body had been found in 2 days later. It was more than enough to convince the authorities that Kathleen's father was an accomplice in the murder.
Obviously, this information really helped us, and now Thomas is going to get arrested as well.
In fact, they arrested Thomas Dorsett on the afternoon of his suicide attempt, not long after the doctors determined that his life was no longer in danger.
We arrested him while he was in the hospital.
By By December of 2010, Kathleen Dorsett sat in the Monmouth County, New Jersey jail, held on $1.5 million bail. The 36-year-old was charged with murdering her ex-husband, Stephen Moore, over custody of the couple's 2-year-old daughter.
She wanted Stephen out of her life, and he wasn't going. He wasn't going to leave because he loved his daughter desperately.
Stephen apparently wasn't the only father who would do anything for his daughter, though. Kathleen's father, 64-year-old Thomas Dorsett, was also in jail, charged with Stephen's murder.
When Stephen and Kathleen started having their problems, Tom's parental instinct was to protect his daughter.
The news that Kathleen, an elementary school teacher, and her father, a respected heating and air contractor, had allegedly conspired to kill someone, stunned Ocean Township, the quiet middle-class community that the Dorsetts called home.
People have had divorce cases and custody issues, and grandparents have had issues over that. But to actually have it go that far of a step to murder, I think most people were shocked about that.
But that December, just days before Christmas, the citizens of Ocean Township were in for another surprise. On December 20th, the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office received a phone call from an investigator in neighboring Ocean County.
That law enforcement officer had received a phone call from an inmate at the Monmouth County Correctional Institute.
The inmate claimed that she knew Kathleen, too.
They had become friends in the jail.
And according to the inmate, she and Kathleen had become so close that her new friend had more or less confessed that she and her father had killed Stephen.
Kathleen talked about how things that they did wrong, that they should have cleaned up the driveway a little bit better.
However, the inmate said that Kathleen's alleged confession wasn't what prompted her to contact the authorities. Instead, she claimed that it was because her new friend had approached her a few days earlier, livid that the courts had just awarded Stephen's mother temporary custody of their daughter.
When Stephen was killed and was removed by the Dorsett family, his family stepped up.
And if what the inmate told the authorities was true, Kathleen was determined to keep that from happening.
Kathleen was soliciting to get someone to kill Stephen Moore's mother.
Because she had custody of Stephen and Kathleen's baby.
But were the inmate's incredible accusations too good to be true?
She was, as it turns out, is kind of a professional snitch.
However, since Kathleen was in jail, the investigators were able to at least check on some of her fellow inmates' claims.
The investigative team were able to recover telephone conversations between Kathleen Dorsett and her mother. Also, we were able to recover letters that were to be mailed out of the Correctional Institute addressed to Leslie Dorsett.
And the contents of those letters and phone calls were explosive.
This one letter in particular talked about the specifics as to how Kathleen Dorsett wanted this murder for hire carried out.
Kathleen tells Leslie Dorsett to write down certain information. 1, to make it a natural death. 2, to write down the address where Evelyn Moore was located.
Even more alarming, the letters revealed that Kathleen somehow learned of Evelyn Moore's new address, the safe house she had secretly relocated to after taking custody of her granddaughter.
The hairs on the back of my neck just went up. This was a location that we believed was a safe and secure location that she could care for Stephen's child, and we went into full action to try to make sure that we could stop this.
Luckily, the letters revealed that there was still a chance. As best the authorities could tell, Kathleen's mother had yet to find a hitman. So the investigators decided to provide her with one.
We have an undercover officer act as this quote-unquote hitman.
Kathleen's fellow inmate, the one who initially contacted the authorities about the murder for hire plot, arranged a meeting between Kathleen's mother and the bogus hitman.
This meeting was at the Seaview Square Mall in Ocean Township and was all at the direction of Kathleen Dorsett.
And on January 10th, 2011, Kathleen's mother, Leslie, did exactly as she had been told.
The undercover officer met with Leslie Dorsett in a food court inside the mall.
At the meeting, she passed along her daughter's detailed instructions and a down payment.
Leslie Dorsett provided the undercover with $1,000.
However, there was one thing that Leslie didn't give the hitman.
Leslie Dorsett was supposed to give the hitman a photograph. She forgot it.
So the investigative team decided to continue surveillance on her and see what she was going to do.
And while the investigators tailed her, Kathleen's mother left the mall, drove home briefly, and was on her way back when she was finally pulled over by police.
There was an envelope that was located inside her vehicle with a picture of Evelyn Moore, with Evelyn's name written on the back of it.
Leslie Dorsett was placed under arrest for attempted murder.
I was shocked because I had obviously dealt with Leslie now over the past few months, and that was the furthest thing that I would ever expect from her. She was a housewife, a mother, and Tom's wife of 40-some-odd years.
In fact, the Dorsett's family attorney was so shocked by Leslie's arrest that he was prepared to fight it.
The court conducted a hearing on this in anticipation of a possible entrapment defense.
And that's when he saw the evidence against both mother and daughter.
They had them red-handed, and they had Leslie pretty much dead to right in that case, with a conviction for attempted murder almost a certainty.
But Leslie wasn't the one the authorities really wanted.
They were looking for Kathleen and for Tom.
Kathleen Dorsett just, manipulated this whole thing. She was the director. She was the dictator.
And now that Kathleen's mother was in jail, facing a possible 30 years without parole, the prosecutors approached Kathleen's father, Thomas Dorsett, and told him they would be willing to agree to a much lighter sentence if he and Kathleen would agree to plead guilty to Stephen's murder.
They had some leverage now because they were well aware that Tom wasn't going to let his wife spend the rest of her life in jail.
However, Leslie's shot at freedom would come at a stiff price.
The prosecutor was very firm on the position that he didn't want Tom or Kathleen ever to get out of jail.
On August 8, 2013, 39-year-old Kathleen Dorsett and her parents, Thomas and Leslie Dorsett, appeared in the Monmouth County, New Jersey Superior Court. Kathleen and her 66-year-old father were both charged with the August 2010 murder of Kathleen's ex-husband, Stephen Moore.
They had this interesting bond between the two of them that is ultimately the reason why that Kathleen was able to solicit Thomas to commit this murder.
68-year-old Leslie Dorsett faced attempted murder charges stemming from a separate plot to kill Stephen's mother.
I was very shocked when I found out that they were involved in this. They seemed normal, just a normal family.
And they were involved. All three of the Dorsetts were in court that morning to plead guilty.
Kathleen admitted that she and her father had hatched this idea.
In a tearful statement to the court, Kathleen admitted that rather than share custody with Stephen, she decided that he had to die.
Stephen Moore was nothing more than a guy that wanted to be with his daughter. And for whatever reason, that was grounds for his wife to kill him.
And the family's generous offer to set Stephen up in Florida. Kathleen said it was all a hoax to put her ex-husband off guard.
The Dorsetts never even made any effort to find a place for Stephen to live down there.
And then Kathleen explained how on the morning of August 16, 2010, she'd lured Stephen to his death.
Kathleen told him she had some tools there that she wanted him to get rid of from the basement, and the only way to get there was to go into the backyard.
Only when Stephen came around the corner of the house, Thomas Dorsett was waiting for him, armed with a heavy object.
He hit him across the head with it, and Stephen went down.
And once Stephen was down, Thomas strangled his former son-in-law until he stopped moving.
They put him in the trunk of his mother's car, and Thomas drove off with it.
After her plea, the judge sentenced Kathleen to a total of 58 years in prison.
She was the one behind all this.
Kathleen's mother, Leslie, received 7 years for her part in trying to kill Stephen's mother.
The state, I think, recognized that Leslie was a pawn, being, played by her daughter.
Thomas Dorsett, meanwhile, was sentenced to 45 years for killing Stephen, after explaining that he'd only done it for his daughter.
To this day, he continues to believe that his daughter's the best daughter that any father could ever have.
On the evening of March 6, 2013, the ancient city of Siena appeared as it always had. Narrow stone streets wound their way between medieval buildings that had survived wars, political upheaval, economic revolutions, and the relentless passage of time, as daylight slowly surrendered to the glow of street lamps. Few people walking beneath the towering walls of the city's historic center could have imagined that they were about to witness the beginning of one of modern Italy's most enduring judicial mysteries. At the center of that mystery stood a single building whose history stretched back more than 5 centuries. Rocca Salimbeni, the headquarters of Banca Monte dei Paschi di Siena, had long symbolized permanence. Established in 1472, Monte dei Paschi was not merely another financial institution. It was the oldest bank in continuous operation anywhere in the world, an institution that had survived kingdoms, republics, economic crises, and global wars. Its walls carried the weight of generations of Italian history. Yet behind those historic stone facades, another story had been unfolding, a story not of medieval prosperity, but of financial turmoil, criminal investigations, and public distrust. During 2012 and early 2013, Monte dei Paschi di Siena found itself engulfed in one of the most significant banking scandals in Italian history. Investigators were examining the bank's controversial acquisition of Banca Antonveneta, a transaction criticized for its enormous cost, alongside complex derivatives operations that were alleged to have concealed billions of euros in losses. Public confidence in the institution had deteriorated rapidly. Financial police had begun investigating several senior executives. Newspapers across Italy covered every development, and each new revelation deepened the sense that one of the country's oldest financial institutions was facing its greatest modern crisis. It was within this atmosphere of uncertainty that David Rossi continued his work. Rossi served as the communications director of Monte dei Paschi di Siena, occupying a position that placed him close to the center of one of Italy's biggest financial scandals. He had worked closely with former chairman Giuseppe Musari and was responsible for managing the bank's communications during an exceptionally turbulent period. Yet despite the attention surrounding the institution, Rossi himself had not been charged with any crime. He was not officially considered a suspect. Nevertheless, only weeks earlier, on February 19th, investigators had searched both his office and his home while gathering documents connected to the wider banking investigation. The searches were part of an effort to collect evidence related to the financial scandal rather than a criminal accusation against Rossi personally. But they inevitably intensified the pressure surrounding his professional life. Then came the evening of March 6th. As many employees had already left for the day, Rossi remained inside his office in Rocca Salimbeni. The exact details of his final minutes have never been fully established. What is known is that at approximately 8:43 p.m., he fell from the window of his office into the narrow alley below. A secretary eventually noticed that the office window was open. Looking down into the alley, she saw Rossi lying on the ground beneath the building. Emergency services were called, but despite their response, David Rossi died shortly afterward from the injuries he sustained in the fall. At first glance, investigators believed the circumstances pointed towards suicide. Inside Rossi's office, police recovered a handwritten note from a wastebasket containing a brief sentence in Italian. Ho fatto una cavolata. Translated into English, the words read, "I did something stupid." Investigators also found several crumpled draft letters addressed to his wife. Together, these discoveries appear to support the conclusion that Rossi had chosen to end his own life. Prosecutors initially accepted this interpretation, and for a time the case seemed tragically straightforward. Another life lost amid overwhelming personal and professional pressure. Another victim of a financial scandal whose consequences extended far beyond balance sheets and corporate boardrooms. But the apparent simplicity of that conclusion did not survive for long. Almost immediately, members of David Rossi's family rejected the idea that he had taken his own life. Their objections were not based solely on disbelief or grief. They believed important questions had not been answered. As additional information gradually became public, those questions began attracting wider attention. Surveillance cameras had captured the fall. The footage, instead of resolving uncertainty, became one of the most intensely scrutinized pieces of evidence in the case. Observers questioned Rossi's movements during and after the fall. They noted that he appeared to move for more than 20 minutes after reaching the ground. They also pointed to the appearance of two bank employees near his body who, according to later accounts, did not immediately provide assistance or call emergency services. None of these observations by themselves established that a crime had occurred, but together they fueled growing public debate. Other details proved equally difficult to ignore. Among the most discussed was Rossi's wristwatch. According to later analyses, the watch did not appear beneath the window at the same time as Rossi's body. Instead, it reportedly appeared approximately 20 minutes later. The timing raised questions that investigators would continue to examine years afterward. If accurate, how had the watch reached the ground so much later? Had it fallen separately? Had someone returned to the window after Rossi's fall? The available evidence offered no definitive answer, but the question refused to disappear. Medical findings added further uncertainty. Examiners documented injuries to Rossi's face, elbows, arms, nose, and lips. His family argued that some of these injuries appeared inconsistent with a fall alone and may have existed before he went out of the window. Over the years, forensic specialists disagreed about the significance of those wounds. Some believed they could be explained by the impact. Others questioned whether every injury fit that explanation. Once again, certainty remained elusive. What initially appeared to be a closed case slowly transformed into something far more complicated. The official conclusion of suicide increasingly faced challenges from Rossi's family, journalists, independent experts, and eventually lawmakers themselves. Investigations were reopened. Evidence was reviewed repeatedly. Surveillance footage underwent renewed examination. Forensic analyses were revisited using updated methods. Witnesses were interviewed again. More than a decade after David Rossi's death, Italy's parliament established a special commission to examine whether earlier investigations had overlooked crucial evidence. The process would ultimately produce one of the most remarkable developments in the entire case. In early 2026, after years of reviewing forensic evidence, surveillance recordings, witness testimony, and reconstructions, the Parliamentary Commission announced that it no longer considered suicide to be a plausible explanation. According to its interim findings, The available forensic evidence was incompatible with Rossi voluntarily jumping from the window. The commission stated that he had likely been restrained by both wrists outside the window before falling, and that certain facial injuries were inconsistent with self-inflicted trauma. Yet even this dramatic reassessment failed to provide the one answer everyone sought. No suspect was identified. No individual was charged with causing David Rossi's death. No definitive motive was established. The possibility that Rossi possessed sensitive knowledge connected to the banking scandal remained only one of several theories, none of which have been proven in court. More than 13 years after that March evening, the essential question remains unanswered. Was David Rossi the victim of overwhelming personal despair, as investigators initially believed? Or did his death represent something far darker, concealed behind the walls of one of the world's oldest financial institutions? Between those two possibilities lies a case that has challenged investigators, divided experts, and left a grieving family searching for certainty. In a city where history seems permanently carved into stone, one night in March 2013 continues to cast a shadow that neither time nor repeated investigations have been able to erase. This is the story of David Rossi, a story defined not by clear conclusions, but by unanswered questions, contested evidence, and a search for truth that continues to this day. Before the events of March 6th, 2013 became the focus of public debate, parliamentary inquiries, and countless media investigations, David Rossi was known primarily as a communications professional working inside one of Italy's most historic financial institutions. His name rarely appeared in newspaper headlines, and when it did, it was almost always in connection with the institution he represented rather than his own personal life. Yet history often places ordinary professionals at the center of extraordinary events, and Rossi would ultimately become one of the most recognizable figures associated with a banking scandal that reshaped public confidence in Italy's financial system. Understanding his story requires looking beyond the night of his death and examining the environment in which he lived and worked, a setting defined by centuries of tradition, unprecedented financial instability, and an investigation that would eventually touch nearly every corner of one of Europe's oldest banks. David Rossi served as the communications director of Banca Monte dei Paschi di Siena, commonly known as MPS. In any major financial institution, the communications department occupies a uniquely challenging position. It serves as the bridge between the organization and the outside world, responding to journalists, preparing official statements, managing public perception, and attempting to preserve confidence even during periods of uncertainty. As communications director, Rossi stood at that intersection every day. His responsibilities placed him close to senior management, requiring him to understand not only how the bank presented itself publicly, but also the internal developments that shaped those public messages. Among the senior figures with whom Rossi worked closely was former chairman Giuseppe Musari. Their professional relationship reflected Rossi's position within the bank's leadership structure. Although he was not responsible for financial decision-making, his role required frequent interaction with executives whose decisions would later come under intense legal and public scrutiny. This proximity would eventually contribute to speculation after his death, but it is important to distinguish confirmed facts from assumptions. The available evidence confirms that Rossi worked closely with Musari as communications director. It also confirms that Rossi himself was never formally accused of participating in the financial crimes under investigation. At no point before his death was he charged with any offense, nor was he officially considered a criminal suspect by prosecutors. That distinction would remain significant throughout the years that followed, as public discussion sometimes blurred the line between professional association and legal responsibility. To understand why Rossi's position attracted such attention, it is necessary to understand the institution itself. Monte dei Paschi di Siena is not simply another European bank. Founded in 1472, it holds the distinction of being the oldest bank in continuous operation anywhere in the world. For more than 5 centuries, it survived political revolutions, economic transformations, wars, and financial crises. Its headquarters, Rocca Salimbeni, dominates the historic center of Siena, a city whose medieval architecture reflects centuries of Italian history. Walking through its stone corridors, one encounters not merely an office building, but a monument to institutional longevity. The bank's history is deeply intertwined with that of Siena itself. Generations of residents regarded Monte dei Paschi as more than a financial institution. It was part of the city's identity. This remarkable legacy made the crisis that emerged during 2012 and 2013 all the more shocking. Institutions built over centuries often carry an image of permanence. Yet even centuries of history could not shield Monte dei Paschi from the consequences of modern financial decisions. By 2012, the bank found itself facing one of the gravest crises in its long existence. Central to that crisis was its acquisition of Banca Antonveneta, a transaction that drew widespread criticism because of the exceptionally high price paid for the purchase. As financial conditions worsened, attention also turned toward a series of complex derivatives transactions that were alleged to have concealed billions of euros in losses. These developments transformed what might have remained an internal corporate problem into a national scandal. Financial newspapers, television broadcasts, and political debates increasingly focused on Monte dei Paschi. Questions emerged about corporate governance, executive decision-making, transparency, and regulatory oversight. Public confidence eroded as investigators attempted to determine whether financial losses had been hidden through complicated financial instruments. The institution that had survived more than 5 centuries suddenly found itself confronting one of the greatest reputational crises in its history. Italy's financial police began investigating several senior executives connected to the bank. These investigations generated widespread media attention, with each new development producing additional headlines. As prosecutors examined documents and financial transactions, pressure intensified both inside and outside the institution. Employees continued reporting to work, departments continued operating, and official communications continued to be issued. Yet the atmosphere surrounding the bank had fundamentally changed. Every announcement attracted scrutiny. Every public statement was analyzed. Every legal development generated new speculation. It was within this increasingly difficult environment that David Rossi continued performing his professional responsibilities. His work required him to communicate on behalf of an institution whose credibility was being questioned almost daily. Although there is no evidence that Rossi himself was accused of wrongdoing, his role naturally placed him near the center of an unfolding public controversy. As communications director, he occupied one of the most visible administrative positions within the organization. Reporters sought information. Public interest intensified. The bank's reputation continued to deteriorate. While the historical record does not describe Rossi's private thoughts or emotional state during this period, the objective circumstances demonstrate that he worked within an institution experiencing extraordinary legal, financial, and reputational pressure. On February 19, 2013, approximately 2 weeks before his death, investigators executed searches of both Rossi's office and his home. These searches formed part of the broader investigation into the Monte dei Paschi financial scandal. Authorities sought documents that might assist their inquiries into the bank's activities. Importantly, the searches did not mean Rossi had become a criminal defendant. According to the available evidence, he was neither prosecuted nor formally identified as a suspect. The searches reflected investigators' efforts to collect potentially relevant material rather than an accusation directed specifically against him. Nevertheless, such investigative actions inevitably increased public attention. Whenever police searched the residence and workplace of a senior employee during a nationally significant financial investigation, media interest follows. Newspapers reported on developments surrounding Monte Pachi almost continuously. Every procedural step became another chapter in an expanding story that affected not only the bank's leadership but also public confidence in one of Italy's most respected institutions. Within the bank itself, uncertainty became a defining characteristic of daily operations. Executives faced legal scrutiny. Financial decisions from previous years were examined in detail. Investigators continued gathering evidence. Employees worked in an environment where institutional stability could no longer be taken for granted. Although the available record does not permit conclusions about individual conversations or personal emotions, the broader atmosphere surrounding Monte Pachi during early 2013 was unmistakably one of uncertainty and intense public attention. The contrast between the bank's ancient history and its contemporary crisis became increasingly striking. For centuries, Monte Pachi had symbolized resilience. Its headquarters stood as a reminder of continuity through changing political and economic eras. Visitors walking through Siena admired the same stone architecture that generations before them had admired. Yet behind those historic walls, investigators were examining allegations involving modern financial instruments, complex corporate transactions, and enormous reported losses. The collision between historical prestige and contemporary scandal created a setting unlike almost any other financial investigation in Italy. Against this backdrop, David Rossi remained a professional figure rather than a public celebrity. He was known inside the institution as the person responsible for communications and externally as a senior representative of the bank. There is no verified evidence that he was accused of orchestrating the financial decisions under investigation, nor that prosecutors regarded him as a participant in the alleged misconduct. Nevertheless, proximity often shapes perception. Because Rossi worked closely with senior leadership during one of the country's largest banking scandals, his name inevitably became associated with events far larger than his own professional responsibilities. As February turned into March 2013, the investigation into Monte Pachi continued gathering momentum. The searches conducted on February 19th remained a recent development. Media attention showed no sign of diminishing. Questions surrounding the Anton Veneta acquisition and the alleged derivatives transactions persisted. Investigators continued examining evidence related to the bank's operations. Within this atmosphere of uncertainty, David Rossi continued reporting to work at Rocca Salimbini, carrying out his responsibilities inside a building that had witnessed more than 5 centuries of Italian history. No one could know that within weeks, attention would shift dramatically away from financial documents and corporate decisions toward a single tragic event that would eclipse nearly every other aspect of the scandal. The death of the bank's communications director would transform an already controversial financial investigation into something even more complex, a case in which questions about banking practices would become inseparable from questions about life, death, forensic evidence, and the search for truth. Before investigators began examining surveillance footage, before forensic experts debated injuries, before parliamentary commissions revisited years of evidence, David Rossi was simply a senior communications executive working inside the world's oldest bank during one of the most turbulent periods in its modern history. That context does not explain what happened on the evening of March 6, 2013, but it explains why his death immediately drew national attention. It occurred at the intersection of history, finance, public scrutiny, and criminal investigation, ensuring that what might otherwise have been treated as a private tragedy would instead become one of the most closely examined and fiercely debated cases in contemporary Italian judicial history. March 6, 2013 began like countless other working days inside the headquarters of Banca Monte dei Paschi di Siena. Beyond the walls of Rocca Salambini, the medieval city of Siena followed its familiar rhythm. Tourists wandered through narrow streets shaped by centuries of history. Local businesses prepared to close for the evening, and residents crossed the ancient piazzas that had changed remarkably little over generations. Inside the headquarters of the world's oldest operating bank, however, the atmosphere remained defined by uncertainty. The financial crisis surrounding Monte dei Paschi had not disappeared. Investigations into the bank's controversial acquisition of Banca Antonveneta and the alleged use of derivatives to conceal billions of euros in losses continued to dominate headlines throughout Italy. Every development attracted media attention, and every public statement issued by the institution was examined with unusual intensity. Yet despite the continuing scrutiny, work inside the bank carried on. Employees reported to their offices, meetings continued, documents were prepared, and departments performed their daily responsibilities as they had done throughout the unfolding crisis. David Rossi, the bank's communications director, was among those still working that evening. As communications director, Rossi occupied an office inside Rocca Salambini, the historic headquarters that had stood at the heart of Siena for centuries. The available evidence does not provide a detailed minute-by-minute account of his activities throughout that day, nor does it reveal the precise conversations he may have had with colleagues. What is known is that Rossi remained in his office as evening approached. Just over 2 weeks had passed since investigators searched both his office and his home as part of the broader investigation into the bank's financial scandal. Although Rossi had not been charged with any offense and was not officially considered a suspect, those searches had become part of the increasingly complex environment surrounding Monte dei Paschi. On the evening of March 6th, that environment would become the backdrop for an event that would remain unresolved for years to come. At approximately 8:43 p.m., something happened inside Rossi's office that would transform both his life and the course of the ongoing public discussion surrounding Monte dei Paschi. According to the established timeline, David Rossi fell from the window of his office into the narrow alley below the building. The exact sequence of events inside the office immediately before the fall has never been conclusively established. No definitive account exists describing Rossi's final moments before he went out of the window, and over the years, competing interpretations of the available evidence have only deepened the uncertainty surrounding those final seconds. What is certain is that the fall occurred shortly before 8:43 p.m., marking the beginning of one of Italy's most controversial death investigations. After the fall, a secretary inside the building noticed that the office window was open. Looking outside, she saw Rossi lying motionless in the alley beneath the building. Emergency services were contacted and an ambulance was dispatched to the scene. Despite the response of medical personnel, Rossi succumbed to the severe injuries he sustained in the fall and died shortly afterward. For investigators arriving at Rocca Salambini that evening, the scene initially appeared capable of supporting a straightforward explanation. A man had fallen from his office window. The immediate task was to secure the scene, collect evidence, and determine whether there were indications of criminal involvement or whether the death represented a suicide. As officers began documenting the office and surrounding area, they recovered what would become one of the central pieces of evidence in the initial investigation. Inside a wastebasket in Rossi's office, investigators discovered a handwritten note containing a single sentence, "Ho fatto una cavallata." Translated into English, the phrase means, "I did something stupid." Its brevity immediately drew attention. Unlike lengthy farewell letters sometimes associated with suicides, this message consisted of only a few words. Nevertheless, investigators considered it significant because of both its wording and the location in which it had been found. The note was not the only written material recovered from the office. Investigators also found several crumpled draft letters addressed to Rossi's wife. These drafts, discarded in the trash rather than left in plain view, became another important element of the early investigation. Together with the handwritten note, they appeared to suggest preparation for a final communication. During the initial inquiry, prosecutors regarded these written materials as evidence consistent with suicide. At that stage, nothing publicly available appeared sufficient to overturn that interpretation. The combination of the handwritten note, the discarded drafts, and the fatal fall from the office window formed the foundation upon which the first official conclusions would be built. Yet even as investigators assembled what they believed was a coherent explanation, details emerging from the scene would later become the source of profound disagreement. The office itself offered few immediate answers beyond the written documents. The decisive questions concerned not only what had happened inside the room, but also what had occurred outside the building after Rossi fell. Unlike many fatal falls that leave no visual record, this incident had been captured by surveillance cameras. At first, the existence of video footage seemed likely to remove uncertainty. Cameras, after all, are often regarded as impartial witnesses. They record without memory, emotion, or personal interpretation. But in the years that followed, the surveillance recordings would produce more questions than answers. According to later examinations of the footage, Rossi did not appear to die instantly after striking the ground. Observers reported that he continued moving for more than 20 minutes following the impact. This detail became one of the most discussed aspects of the case. Equally significant was the appearance of two individuals near Rossi's body during that period. Later identified as bank employees, the two men approached the area where Rossi lay. According to subsequent accounts and analyses, they did not immediately provide assistance or call emergency services. Their actions, captured on surveillance footage, became a focus of extensive public discussion. It is important to emphasize that these observations alone did not establish criminal conduct. Nevertheless, they became central to the questions raised by Rossi's family and by those who believed the initial investigation had failed to examine every possibility. Another detail would emerge only through later analysis of the surveillance recordings. Rossi had been wearing a wristwatch before the fall. According to subsequent examinations, the watch did not appear beneath the window at the same moment as Rossi's body. Instead, analysts concluded that it appeared approximately 20 minutes later. This seemingly small observation generated enormous controversy. If the timeline reconstructed from the footage was correct, investigators faced an obvious question. Why had the watch appeared so much later? Did it become detached during the fall, but remain somewhere before dropping? Did it fall separately for reasons unrelated to outside involvement? Or had another event occurred after Rossi reached the ground? The available evidence did not provide definitive answers. Instead, the delayed appearance of the wristwatch became one more unresolved element in a growing collection of unanswered questions. Medical examinations conducted after Rossi's death documented multiple injuries. Among them were injuries affecting his face, elbows, arms, nose, and lips. At first, such findings might seem unsurprising given the severity of a fall from an upper-story window. However, Rossi's family argued that some of these injuries appeared inconsistent with the fall itself and may have existed before he went out of the window. Over the following years, forensic experts debated these findings extensively. Some specialists considered the injuries compatible with the impact. Others questioned whether every documented injury could be fully explained by the fall alone. These disagreements would eventually play a significant role in later reviews of the case. But on the night of March 6th, investigators were still assembling the first pieces of evidence without the benefit of years of subsequent analysis. In the immediate aftermath of Rossi's death, authorities focused on reconstructing the available evidence as it appeared at the scene. The handwritten note, the discarded drafts addressed to his wife, the location of the fall, and the preliminary examination of the office all contributed to the emerging conclusion that Rossi had taken his own life. From the perspective of the initial investigation, these elements formed a narrative that appeared internally consistent. Yet outside the investigative offices, a different narrative was already beginning to develop. Rossi's family rejected the suicide conclusion almost immediately. Their objections reflected not only grief, but also a conviction that the available evidence failed to explain everything that had occurred. The surveillance footage, the injuries, and later the questions surrounding the wristwatch would all become central to their challenge. At first, however, those concerns remained secondary to the official findings being assembled by prosecutors. The evening of March 6th thus ended with two competing perspectives beginning to take shape. On one side stood the official investigation, supported by the handwritten note and the circumstances observed at the scene. On the other stood a grieving family unwilling to accept that the available evidence fully explained David Rossi's death. Neither side could yet foresee how long the search for answers would continue. What appeared that night to be the conclusion of a tragic event would instead become the beginning of a judicial controversy lasting more than a decade. Every image recorded by the surveillance cameras, every injury documented by forensic examiners, every written note recovered from the office, and every minute reconstructed from that evening would eventually be revisited repeatedly by investigators, journalists, forensic specialists, and members of Italy's parliament. The events of March 6th, 2013 did not end when emergency responders left the alley beneath Rocca Salimbeni. They marked the starting point of an investigation whose most important questions would remain unanswered for years, ensuring that David Rossi's final evening would become one of the most closely examined and fiercely debated incidents in contemporary Italian legal history. The death of David Rossi might have remained officially classified as a suicide had it not been for the persistence of his family and the growing number of questions that emerged after investigators began examining the available evidence more closely. In many criminal investigations, the official conclusion brings an end to public discussion. In this case, however, the opposite occurred. Rather than settling the matter, the initial ruling became the beginning of years of controversy. Every piece of evidence collected on the evening of March 6th, 2013 would eventually be revisited. Every official conclusion would face renewed scrutiny. Every unanswered question would become the subject of debate among prosecutors, forensic specialists, journalists, lawmakers, and members of the public. What followed was not one investigation, but a series of investigations spanning more than a decade, each attempting to determine whether the first conclusion had overlooked something essential. Shortly after Rossi's death, the public prosecutor's office in Siena began reconstructing the circumstances surrounding the incident. The investigators focused on the physical evidence recovered from the office. De andritten note stating, "Ho fatto una cavolata." The draft letters addressed to Rossi's wife that had been found in the wastebasket, and the circumstances surrounding the fall from the office window. After reviewing the available material, prosecutors concluded that there was no evidence indicating the involvement of another person. According to the official findings, David Rossi had voluntarily jumped from the window, and the case was therefore classified as a suicide. From the perspective of the first investigation, the evidence appeared sufficient to support that conclusion. No criminal prosecution relating to homicide was initiated, and the case was formally closed. Yet for Rossi's family, the investigation had answered too few questions. They did not accept that the available evidence established suicide beyond doubt. Instead, they believed significant aspects of the case had either been overlooked or insufficiently examined. Their objections were not limited to emotional disbelief following a sudden loss. They centered on specific pieces of evidence that, in their view, demanded closer analysis. The family's determination ensured that the case did not disappear from public attention. As journalists continued reporting on the banking scandal surrounding Monte dei Paschi di Siena, Rossi's death increasingly became part of a wider national conversation about accountability, transparency, and the quality of criminal investigations. Among the most important pieces of evidence was the surveillance footage recorded on the evening of March 6th. Unlike many unexplained deaths, this incident had been captured on camera. At first, the existence of video recordings seemed likely to eliminate uncertainty. Cameras are often regarded as impartial observers that preserve events exactly as they occur. However, as specialists, journalists, and members of Rossi's family repeatedly reviewed the recordings, they reached very different interpretations from those initially presented by investigators. The footage reportedly showed Rossi falling from the office window into the alley below. But according to later analyses, the recording also appeared to show that he continued moving for more than 20 minutes after the impact. This observation immediately raised questions about the timeline of events following the fall. If Rossi survived the impact for a significant period, every minute after he reached the ground became potentially important. The video also revealed another detail that attracted increasing attention over the years. Two individuals appeared near Rossi's body after the fall. Their identities were later established as employees of the bank. According to later accounts based on the surveillance footage, they did not immediately provide assistance or call emergency services upon approaching the injured man. The actions of these two employees became one of the most widely discussed aspects of the investigation. It is important to distinguish, however, between observation and conclusion. The footage documented their presence, but it did not by itself establish criminal responsibility. Nevertheless, their behavior became a recurring subject of public debate because many observers questioned why immediate assistance had not been provided to a man who appeared to remain alive after the fall. The surveillance footage continued revealing details that would shape the investigation for years. Perhaps the most controversial involved an object so ordinary that it might easily have escaped notice: David Rossi's wristwatch. According to analyses conducted after the initial investigation, the watch did not appear beneath the window at the same moment Rossi fell. Instead, later examinations concluded that the watch became visible approximately 20 minutes afterward. This unexpected timing generated intense discussion. If the watch had been on Rossi's wrist during the fall, why did it not reach the ground simultaneously? Could it have become caught somewhere before falling later? Had another event occurred above after Rossi was already lying in the alley? Or had the timing been misinterpreted? The available evidence did not permit a definitive answer. Yet the wristwatch became one of the most recognizable symbols of the uncertainty surrounding the case. It represented a small detail that refused to fit comfortably within the original explanation, encouraging further examination rather than closure. Questions surrounding Rossi's physical injuries proved equally significant. The post-mortem examination documented injuries affecting his face, elbows, arms, nose, and lips. During the initial investigation, such injuries were generally considered consistent with a fall from a considerable height. Rossi's family, however, maintained that some injuries appeared inconsistent with impact alone and may have been sustained before the fall occurred. Their position introduced a critical forensic question. Were all of Rossi's injuries the direct result of striking the ground? Or did some indicate an earlier event inside or near the office? Over the years, forensic specialists disagreed about the answer. Some experts concluded that the injuries could be explained by the mechanics of the fall and subsequent impact. Others questioned whether certain facial injuries, in particular, were fully compatible with that explanation. These disagreements did not immediately overturn the official ruling, but they ensured that the medical evidence remained the subject of continuing professional debate rather than settled consensus. As public interest intensified and additional questions accumulated, authorities eventually reopened the investigation. This second inquiry represented an acknowledgement that the family's concerns and the continuing public discussion justified another review of the available evidence. Investigators re-examined materials that had already formed part of the first inquiry, reconsidered aspects of the surveillance recordings, and evaluated whether the existing evidence supported changing the original conclusion. After completing this renewed examination, prosecutors once again concluded that David Rossi had died by suicide. For the second time, they reported that the available evidence did not establish the involvement of another individual. Once again, the official position remained unchanged. Yet the second conclusion did not end the controversy any more effectively than the first. Rossi's family continued challenging the findings, arguing that important questions remained unanswered. Their persistence prevented the case from fading into history. Journalists continued publishing reports examining inconsistencies they believed had not been adequately addressed. Public discussion increasingly focused not only on Rossi's death itself, but also on whether the investigations had been sufficiently thorough. As years passed, the case gradually evolved beyond a single criminal investigation. It became a broader discussion about forensic interpretation, institutional transparency, and the responsibility of investigative authorities to revisit conclusions when new questions emerge. By this stage, the controversy surrounding Rossi's death extended far beyond Siena. It attracted national attention throughout Italy because it existed alongside one of the country's most significant financial scandals. Monte dei Paschi di Siena remained under intense scrutiny, and every new development concerning Rossi's death inevitably reignited interest in the bank's broader legal difficulties. Although there was no official finding connecting his death directly to the banking investigation, the coincidence of timing ensured that the two stories remained closely associated in public discussion. This continuing uncertainty eventually reached Italy's national legislature. In 2021, the Italian parliament established a special commission to conduct an independent examination of the case. The creation of a parliamentary commission reflected the extraordinary nature of the controversy. More than 8 years had passed since Rossi's death, yet the debate surrounding the official conclusions had not diminished. Instead, it had grown stronger. Parliament therefore authorized a comprehensive review designed to examine evidence beyond the scope of the earlier investigations. The commission undertook an extensive reassessment of the case. Members reviewed the original surveillance recordings in detail, commissioned new forensic examinations, conducted reconstructions of the events surrounding the fall, and interviewed numerous witnesses connected to the investigation. Rather than accepting earlier conclusions without question, the commission sought to determine whether advances in forensic analysis and renewed examination of existing evidence could clarify unresolved issues. Its work represented one of the most comprehensive reviews ever conducted into Rossi's death. Even this effort did not conclude quickly, because many questions remained unresolved. A new parliamentary commission continued the work in 2024, extending the examination rather than allowing it to end prematurely. The continuation of parliamentary scrutiny demonstrated that uncertainty persisted despite multiple Prosecutorial investigations. As experts revisited medical findings, surveillance recordings, and witness testimony, attention increasingly focused on whether the physical evidence truly supported the original conclusion of suicide. The years of review culminated in a major development during early 2026, when the Parliamentary Commission issued interim findings that differed dramatically from the conclusions reached by prosecutors more than a decade earlier. According to the Commission, the available forensic evidence no longer supported the hypothesis that Rossi had voluntarily jumped from a window. Instead, the Commission stated that the evidence excluded suicide as the most plausible explanation. Its findings suggested that Rossi had likely been restrained by both wrists outside the window before falling. The Commission further concluded that certain injuries to his face appeared inconsistent with self-inflicted trauma, and that there were indications he may have been suspended or held before the fall occurred. These conclusions marked the most significant turning point in the history of the case. For the first time, an official investigative body publicly rejected the explanation that had formed the basis of every earlier prosecutorial decision. Yet even this dramatic reassessment stopped short of identifying who, if anyone, was responsible. The Commission did not name a perpetrator. It did not establish a definitive motive. It did not produce evidence sufficient to support criminal convictions. Instead, it fundamentally altered the central question. The debate was no longer limited to whether Rossi had taken his own life. It now extended to the possibility that his death resulted from homicide, even though the identity of any potential perpetrator remained unknown. More than a decade after David Rossi fell from the window of his office, investigators had reviewed the same evidence repeatedly, each examination producing new questions rather than definitive answers. The handwritten note remained part of the record. The surveillance footage continued to be analyzed. The delayed appearance of the wristwatch remained unexplained. The injuries documented by forensic examiners continued to divide expert opinion. 2 prosecutorial investigations concluded suicide, while a parliamentary commission later rejected that conclusion based on new forensic interpretations. Rather than producing certainty, each successive investigation expanded the complexity of the case. What began as a seemingly straightforward inquiry into a tragic death had become one of the most closely scrutinized and disputed investigations in contemporary Italian judicial history, leaving behind a record defined less by answers than by the persistence of unresolved questions. Unlike many criminal cases that conclude with arrests, indictments, courtroom testimony, and judicial verdicts, the case of David Rossi followed a very different path. More than a decade after his death, no one had been convicted. No criminal trial had determined responsibility for his fall, and no court had established a definitive sequence of events explaining what happened inside Rocca Salambini on the evening of March 6, 2013. Instead of moving steadily toward a final judgment, the investigation evolved through repeated reviews, conflicting interpretations of evidence, and an extraordinary intervention by the Italian parliament. The legal history of the case, therefore, became as significant as the death itself, illustrating how a judicial conclusion can be questioned, revisited, and fundamentally challenged without immediately producing a corresponding criminal prosecution. Following the initial investigation, prosecutors in Siena concluded that David Rossi had died by suicide. Their determination rested primarily on the evidence collected immediately after the incident, including the handwritten note reading, "Ho fatto una cavolata," translated as, "I did something stupid." The draft letters addressed to Rossi's wife that were recovered from the office wastebasket, and the absence, in their assessment, of evidence demonstrating the involvement of another person. On that basis, the investigation was closed. For the judicial authorities responsible for the case, the available evidence supported a conclusion that no homicide investigation was warranted. Yet that conclusion did not bring closure for Rossi's family. They continued to dispute the official findings and argued that important aspects of the evidence had not been adequately examined. Their efforts, supported by continuing media attention, contributed to renewed public scrutiny of the case. Eventually, prosecutors reopened the investigation and conducted a second review of the available evidence. Despite revisiting the circumstances surrounding Rossi's death, the second investigation reached the same conclusion as the first. Once again, prosecutors determined that the evidence supported suicide rather than homicide. Once again, the case remained without criminal charges against any individual. The legal position, therefore, appeared settled from the perspective of the prosecutorial authorities. But the public controversy continued to grow. The persistence of unanswered questions eventually led to an unusual development. In 2021, the Italian parliament established a special commission to conduct an independent examination of the case. Parliamentary commissions do not replace criminal courts, nor do they issue criminal convictions. Their role is investigative rather than judicial. In Rossi's case, Parliament concluded that the continuing controversy, the repeated concerns expressed by the family, and the broader public interest justified an independent review of the available evidence. The commission therefore undertook one of the most comprehensive examinations ever conducted into Rossi's death. Its work extended well beyond simply reviewing previous reports. Members of the commission examined the original surveillance footage again, ordered new forensic analyses, reconstructed aspects of the incident, and interviewed numerous witnesses connected to the case. Rather than treating earlier prosecutorial findings as conclusive, the commission approached the evidence from the perspective of determining whether previous investigations had overlooked or misinterpreted important facts. This process reflected a willingness to reconsider conclusions that had stood for years, particularly in light of developments in forensic science and the continuing questions surrounding the physical evidence. As the commission continued its work, it became apparent that the investigation would require more time than originally anticipated. Consequently, in 2024, a new parliamentary commission continued the examination, allowing investigators to pursue unresolved issues in greater depth. The continuation of parliamentary oversight demonstrated that the questions surrounding Rossi's death had not diminished with time. Instead, they had become more significant as additional experts revisited the evidence. Every aspect of the case was examined once again, including the surveillance recordings, the medical findings, and the reconstruction of the fall itself. Particular attention was given to the physical evidence that had generated disagreement over the years. The surveillance footage remained central to the commission's work. Members carefully reviewed the recording of Rossi's fall and the events that followed, including the period during which Rossi appeared to move after reaching the ground and the appearance of two bank employees near his body. They also examined the controversy surrounding the delayed appearance of Rossi's wristwatch, a detail that had become one of the most frequently discussed elements of the case. Equally important were the forensic findings. Medical experts reassessed the injuries documented after Rossi's death, paying close attention to the wounds affecting his face, elbows, arms, nose, and lips. Earlier investigations had generally regarded these injuries as compatible with the fall. However, competing expert opinions over the years had questioned whether every injury could be explained solely by the impact. The Parliamentary Commission therefore commissioned further forensic evaluation in an effort to clarify these disagreements. After years of examination, the Commission released interim findings in early 2026 that represented a dramatic departure from the conclusions reached during the earlier prosecutorial investigations. According to the Commission, The available forensic evidence no longer supported the hypothesis that David Rossi had voluntarily jumped from the office window. Instead, the commission stated that suicide should be excluded as the explanation most consistent with the available evidence. This marked a profound shift in the official understanding of the case. The commission further reported that its forensic assessment suggested Rossi had likely been restrained by both wrists while outside the window before the fall occurred. According to the interim findings, the injuries observed on his face were considered inconsistent with self-inflicted trauma. The commission also reported indications that Rossi may have been suspended or held before falling. These conclusions challenged the central assumption upon which the original prosecutorial investigations have been based. Nevertheless, the commission's findings did not resolve the case in the way many observers had hoped. Although the interim report rejected the suicide hypothesis, it did not identify who may have been responsible if Rossi's death resulted from homicide. No individual was named as a suspect by the commission. No definitive reconstruction identified every event preceding the fall. No specific motive was established through the available evidence. Consequently, while the commission fundamentally altered the direction of the investigation, it did not provide the final answers that Rossi's family had sought for so many years. As discussion turned toward possible motives, investigators and observers considered several possibilities, but none reached the level of established fact. One frequently discussed theory suggested that Rossi possessed significant knowledge concerning the financial scandal surrounding Monte dei Paschi di Siena, because he served as communications director and worked closely with senior leadership during one of the bank's most difficult periods. Some observers speculated that he may have been aware of sensitive information connected to the ongoing investigations. Another possibility raised in public discussion was that Rossi may have possessed documents or knowledge potentially damaging to certain individuals associated with the bank. A further theory mentioned the possibility of organized crime connections. However, it is essential to distinguish clearly between speculation and evidence. None of these possible motives has been proven. No court has established that Rossi's death was connected to any of these theories, and no individual has been convicted on the basis of them. They remain possibilities discussed in connection with the case rather than judicially established facts. The absence of definitive criminal findings highlights the unique legal position of the investigation. On one hand, two prosecutorial investigations concluded that Rossi died by suicide. On the other hand, a parliamentary commission later concluded that the available forensic evidence excluded suicide and instead pointed toward homicide. These different conclusions created an unusual situation in which two official institutions reached fundamentally different interpretations of the same underlying event. Rather than bringing certainty, the legal process produced competing official narratives, each supported by its own assessment of the available evidence. By the middle of 2026, the consequences of the Parliamentary Commission's work had already influenced the continuing legal response. The Public Prosecutor's Office in Siena reopened the case once again, conducting further investigative activities alongside the findings presented by Parliament. This reopening did not represent a criminal conviction or a final judicial determination. Instead, it reflected the recognition that the Commission's forensic conclusions justified renewed prosecutorial examination. The investigation, therefore, remained active, with authorities continuing to evaluate evidence in light of the Commission's findings. Despite more than 13 years of investigation, however, several fundamental questions remained unanswered. If David Rossi had not voluntarily jumped from the window, who was responsible for his death? What exactly occurred inside or outside the office immediately before the fall? Why did certain aspects of the surveillance footage appear inconsistent with the original reconstruction? How should the delayed appearance of the wristwatch be explained? Were all of Rossi's injuries caused by the fall, or did some occur beforehand? These questions continued to define the investigation because none had received a definitive judicial answer. As of mid-2026, no individual had been convicted in connection with David Rossi's death. No homicide trial had taken place. No court had issued a final judgment identifying a perpetrator or establishing a proven motive. Instead, the case remained officially unresolved, existing in a state that is relatively rare in modern criminal justice. The original conclusion of suicide had been fundamentally challenged by later forensic findings. Yet those findings had not produced a completed criminal prosecution. The result was a legal landscape defined not by finality, but by continuing investigation. David Rossi's death, therefore, occupies a unique place in contemporary Italian judicial history. It stands as a case in which official conclusions evolved dramatically over time, where repeated reviews transformed the interpretation of forensic evidence, and where the search for accountability remained ongoing despite years of examination. The legal proceedings did not end with a verdict. Instead, they left behind a continuing investigation, an unresolved question of criminal responsibility, and a case that continues to challenge investigators seeking to determine exactly what happened on that March evening inside one of the oldest financial institutions in the world. Why this investigation has continued to command attention more than a decade after the events of March 6th. 2013. The answer lies not in a single dramatic revelation, but in the unusual convergence of conflicting official conclusions, evolving forensic analysis, and unanswered questions that continue to resist definitive resolution. Few modern Italian cases have experienced such a dramatic transformation. The investigation began with what authorities believed was a straightforward explanation. It later evolved into one of the country's most debated judicial controversies, ultimately prompting parliamentary intervention and the reopening of prosecutorial inquiries. That evolution itself has become an important part of the story. At the heart of the controversy is the distinction between evidence and interpretation. Throughout the years, many of the underlying pieces of evidence remain the same. The office where David Rossi spent his final hours did not change. The surveillance footage remained the same recording captured on the evening of March 6, 2013. The handwritten note containing the words, "Ho fatto una cavallata," remained exactly as investigators first discovered it. The draft letters addressed to his wife remained part of the original investigative file. The physical injuries documented during the post-mortem examination did not change with time. What changed instead was the interpretation of that evidence. This distinction is essential because it illustrates how criminal investigations sometimes evolve, not through the discovery of entirely new evidence, but through the re-examination of evidence that already exists. One of the clearest examples concerns the surveillance video. During the initial investigation, the footage did not prevent prosecutors from concluding that Rossi had taken his own life. Years later, however, the same recording became one of the principal reasons many observers questioned that conclusion. Specialists, journalists, members of Rossi's family, and eventually the Parliamentary Commission examined the recording repeatedly. Their attention focused on several details that continued generating discussion. According to later analyses, Rossi appeared to remain alive for more than 20 minutes after reaching the ground. The footage also showed two bank employees approaching the area where he lay. Their identities were eventually established, but questions remained regarding why immediate assistance was reportedly not provided. These observations did not themselves identify a perpetrator or establish criminal responsibility. Nevertheless, they became important because they challenged assumptions about the sequence of events immediately following the fall. The recording therefore became less a source of certainty than an object of continuing forensic and legal debate. The wristwatch represented another example of how seemingly minor evidence acquired enormous significance over time. According to later analyses, the watch did not appear beneath the office window simultaneously with Rossi's body. Instead, it reportedly became visible approximately 20 minutes later. Whether this timing resulted from the mechanics of the fall, another innocent explanation, or an event not initially understood has never been conclusively established. Yet because investigators could not fully explain the timing, the wristwatch became one of the most recognizable unresolved details in the entire investigation. Cases are sometimes remembered because of a single unanswered question that appears too important to ignore. In Rossi's case, the delayed appearance of the watch came to symbolize that uncertainty. Medical evidence followed a similar pattern. During the original investigation, prosecutors considered the injuries documented on Rossi's face, elbows, arms, nose, and lips to be compatible with the fall. Over time, however, alternative forensic interpretations emerged. Members of Rossi's family questioned whether certain injuries had occurred before the fall rather than as a consequence of it. Later forensic reviews commissioned during the Parliamentary Commission's work reached conclusions that differed significantly from the original assessment. According to the Commission's interim findings released in early 2026, some facial injuries were inconsistent with self-inflicted trauma, contributing to the Commission's conclusion that suicide should be excluded. This illustrates another important feature of complex criminal investigations. Forensic science is not merely the collection of evidence. It is also the interpretation of that evidence. As analytical techniques improve and additional experts review existing material, conclusions can change. The Rossi investigation demonstrates both the strengths and the limitations of forensic analysis. Scientific examination can challenge earlier assumptions, but it cannot always answer every remaining question. The Parliamentary Commission's conclusions represented the most significant shift in the history of the case. After reviewing surveillance recordings, commissioning new forensic analyses, reconstructing aspects of the incident, and interviewing numerous witnesses, the Commission concluded that the available evidence no longer supported the suicide hypothesis. Instead, it stated that Rossi had likely been restrained by both wrists outside the window before the fall, and that there were indications he had been suspended or held before falling. These findings fundamentally altered the direction of the investigation. Yet they also revealed the limits of even the most extensive inquiry. The Commission rejected one explanation without establishing another in complete detail. It did not identify who may have restrained Rossi, if that conclusion proves correct. It did not determine precisely who was present inside the office during the final moments before the fall. It did not establish a proven motive supported by sufficient evidence for criminal prosecution. Consequently, the investigation entered a new phase defined by possibility rather than certainty. Another reason the case continues attracting attention is the relationship between Rossi's death and the broader Monte Paschi financial scandal. It is an undeniable fact that Rossi served as communications director during one of the most serious crises in the bank's history. It is equally true that investigators searched both his office and his home on February 19, 2013, while gathering documents related to the wider financial investigation. However, it is also a confirmed fact that Rossi himself was never charged with a crime and was not officially considered a suspect. These distinctions remain essential because unresolved cases often encourage speculation that extends beyond available evidence. Over the years, several possible motives have been discussed publicly. Some observers have suggested that Rossi possessed sensitive knowledge regarding the banking scandal. Others have proposed that he may have had access to documents potentially damaging to certain individuals. Additional speculation has mentioned possible organized crime connections. Yet every one of these ideas remains precisely that, speculation. No court has accepted them as proven facts. No criminal conviction has established any of these theories as the motive behind Rossi's death. Responsible examination of the case, therefore, requires separating established evidence from hypotheses that remain unverified. This distinction is especially important because unresolved investigations naturally invite public curiosity. Human beings seek coherent explanations, particularly when official conclusions change dramatically over time. Yet the absence of certainty does not justify filling evidentiary gaps with unsupported assumptions. One of the defining characteristics of the David Rossi investigation has been the continued effort by investigators to distinguish what can be demonstrated from what can merely be imagined. By mid-2026, the legal position remained clear despite the continuing uncertainty. No one had been convicted in connection with Rossi's death. The Siena Public Prosecutor's Office had reopened the investigation alongside the findings produced by the Parliamentary Commission, but the criminal justice process remained ongoing. The identity of any possible perpetrator, if one exists, had not been established through judicial proceedings. The motive remained unknown. The final sequence of events inside Rocca Salambini on March 6, 2013, remained incomplete. These unresolved issues explain why the case continues to occupy a unique place in Italian public life. It is not simply because the death itself was tragic, nor solely because it occurred during a major banking scandal. Rather, it is because the investigation demonstrates how difficult the search for truth can become when evidence supports competing interpretations. The same surveillance recording has been viewed countless times. The same injuries have been examined by multiple experts. The same handwritten note has been interpreted in different ways. The same physical evidence has produced different official conclusions over time. Such cases remind us that criminal investigations are rarely simple exercises in collecting facts. They require careful interpretation, continual reassessment, and the willingness to acknowledge uncertainty when certainty cannot honestly be claimed. Whether the reopened investigation will eventually answer the remaining questions is impossible to predict. What can be said with confidence is that David Rossi's case has already left a lasting mark on Italian legal history. It has demonstrated the importance of forensic review, the value of independent oversight, and the necessity of remaining open to reconsidering official conclusions when credible evidence justifies renewed examination. Above all, it stands as a reminder that justice is measured not only by the answers it provides, but also by its willingness to continue searching when those answers remain incomplete, until the remaining questions are resolved through lawful investigation and evidence capable of withstanding judicial scrutiny. The story of David Rossi will remain unfinished, continuing to challenge investigators, legal experts, and the public alike in their shared pursuit of the truth. However, there is still one way to continue this documentary-style narrative responsibly without introducing speculation, by focusing on the most important unresolved axis of the entire case. The tension between what the physical evidence appears to show and what the justice system has been able to definitively prove. This is where the story stops being about a single moment in March 2013 and becomes a broader examination of how modern forensic interpretation can fracture a case into competing realities. At the center of this unresolved axis is a simple but persistent contradiction. On one side, two prosecutorial investigations concluded that David Rossi's death was a suicide, based on the evidence available at the time. The handwritten note, "Ho fatto una cavallata," the draft letters to his wife found in the wastebasket, and the absence, according to those investigations, of definitive proof of third-party involvement. On the other side, a parliamentary commission, after years of renewed analysis, concluded in 2026 that the suicide hypothesis should be excluded based on its interpretation of forensic evidence, surveillance footage, and injury patterns suggesting restraint before the fall. Both positions claim to be grounded in the same physical reality. Neither relies on new eyewitness testimony that definitively explains what happened inside the office in the final moments. Instead, both rest on interpretation of incomplete fragments, video sequences, medical reports, timing reconstruction, and material objects recovered from the scene. This is what makes the Rossi case structurally different from most closed investigations. It is not the absence of evidence that defines it, but the instability of meaning assigned to that evidence over time. The surveillance footage remains the most visually powerful element of the case, yet also the most contested. It captures the fall, but not the precise sequence of events inside the office leading up to it. It shows movement after impact, interpreted by some as survival and by others as uncertain post-impact activity. It shows the presence of 2 bank employees near the body, whose actions became a focal point of debate despite not being judicially classified as criminal behavior. It also forms the temporal framework for the disputed wristwatch timeline, which appears later than expected according to post-investigation analysis. But the video, for all its importance, does not answer the central question: what happened inside the office before the fall? The forensic medical evidence introduces another layer of interpretive conflict. Injuries to the face, elbows, arms, nose, and lips were documented during autopsy and initially considered consistent with a fall. Later reinterpretations questioned whether some injuries might be incompatible with that explanation, contributing to the Parliamentary Commission's conclusion that suicide should be excluded. Yet, even within forensic science, such interpretations depend on modeling assumptions about force, trajectory, body positioning, and environmental interaction at the moment of impact. Small differences in interpretation can produce radically different conclusions, especially when no direct eyewitness account exists for the critical seconds before the fall. The wristwatch controversy further illustrates how fragile evidentiary interpretation can become. Over time, the claim that the watch appeared on the ground approximately 20 minutes after the body introduces a temporal anomaly that resists easy explanation. However, the evidence does not independently establish intent, action by a third party, or a confirmed secondary event. It only establishes a discrepancy in observed timing, which investigators then interpret through competing frameworks: mechanical separation during impact, delayed detachment, environmental displacement, or alternative scenarios not directly evidenced in the record. Each interpretation is possible within physics, but none can be definitively proven from the available material alone. This is why the Rossi case has remained open in both legal and public consciousness. It is not anchored by a single decisive contradiction that resolves everything, but by multiple partial inconsistencies that resist being unified into one uncontested narrative. Prosecutors in 2 separate investigations concluded that these inconsistencies did not outweigh the evidence supporting suicide. The Parliamentary Commission concluded that they did. Both conclusions are logically constructed within their respective interpretive frameworks, but they cannot both be simultaneously correct in their final implication about intent and causation. The result is not a clear binary of truth and falsehood, but a structured conflict of interpretation. Another important dimension is what the case reveals about institutional progression over time. The first investigation operated under immediate proximity to the event, with limited time distance from the trauma of the discovery. The second investigation revisited the same material, but ultimately reaffirmed the initial conclusion. The Parliamentary Commission, by contrast, operated more than a decade later, with access to accumulated critique, technological reanalysis, and prolonged public debate. Each stage did not simply re-examine facts. It reinterpreted them through the intellectual and institutional conditions of its time. This temporal layering is crucial to understanding why the case has not converged toward a single resolution. Instead, it has accumulated interpretive layers, each adding complexity rather than closure. By 2026, the reopening of the Siena prosecution marked not a return to the original starting point, but an entry into a new phase defined by institutional disagreement. The Parliamentary Commission's findings did not replace prosecutorial conclusions. They coexisted with them in legal tension. This creates an unusual situation in which no single authoritative narrative fully dominates the case. One branch of the state's investigative apparatus maintains that suicide is the most supported explanation. Another branch, operating under parliamentary mandate, rejects that conclusion based on its forensic reassessment. Meanwhile, judicial proceedings remain active but unresolved, meaning that no final adjudication has been reached in a criminal court. What remains, therefore, is not a solved case awaiting public acceptance, but an open investigative field where multiple interpretations continue to exist simultaneously within official structures. This is the defining characteristic of the David Rossi case as it stands today. It is not simply that questions remain unanswered. It is that the answers provided so far have not converged. Each institutional review has approached the same physical evidence and arrived at different conclusions about its meaning. Each has attempted to reconstruct the final moments inside Rocca Salambini. Yet none has been able to do so in a way that eliminates alternative interpretations. In the absence of a judicial verdict, the case exists in a state where explanation remains provisional rather than final. And so the story returns, inevitably, to the same unresolved center. A window and an office inside one of the oldest banks in the world. A fall recorded on surveillance footage, a set of injuries documented by forensic examiners, and a series of interpretations that continue to diverge even after more than a decade of investigation. Until a court of law reaches a definitive conclusion that reconciles these competing interpretations, or until new evidence emerges capable of doing so, the case of David Rossi remains what it has become over time. Not a closed chapter in judicial history, but an ongoing inquiry into how truth is constructed, contested, and sometimes left unresolved within the limits of available evidence.